leading future forecaster and strategist, and also affiliated with the Stern School of Business in New York. She also won a Nieman Fellowship. Amy, we have very high expectations today after last year and previous years. Take the floor, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I heard the party went pretty late last night, so I'm happy to see all of you here. So my name is Amy Webb. 3 quick things about me. So I founded the Future Today Institute. We're in our 2nd decade, which is my very fancy way of saying we've been around for 11 years. We advise lots of organizations around the world, but the methodology that we use to understand the future is data-driven. And so we are using well-researched methodologies in order to figure out what's coming next, and I'm going to show you today what's on the horizon. I'm an adjunct professor at the Stern School of Business, where I teach an MBA course on futures forecasting and scenario planning, and I have a new book out called The Signals Are Talking, which explains my methodology, because my goal is to democratize the tool of futurists, and hopefully get everybody interested in doing this, because if we're all working on the future is going to be better. So since this is my 3rd year at this conference, which is spectacular and has grown, I'm blown away by Bertrand and all of the, honestly, really by the work that he's done. So since this is my 3rd year, we're going to do things in 3s today. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories about the future of news, which will include lots of trends that journalists and especially editors should be paying attention to. The second thing I'm going to do is give you I'm going to make 3 simple requests of you when you leave and go back to your day jobs, things that I want you to do. And the third thing is that I'm going to give you 3 tools to meet tomorrow. So first, 3 stories about the future of news. So I want to tell you a story about overcoming monsters, because there are monsters in our midst. We are surrounded by monsters. Monsters all over the world. We have a big, giant baby monster in my country. This really happened. This is humiliating. The monster who lives in the White House right now likes to pretend like he's a big truck driver. But there are also monsters facing the news business. So it's no secret that ad revenue is down, that circulation, even in the age of all of these news stories happening all over the world, we're still having a hard time with attention. And attention is currency in the year 2017. So we're still having problems. And on top of everything else, we have to worry about robots taking our jobs. So we've got robots now capable of farming. We have robots now capable, and organic materials capable of creating buildings without any human supervision. We even have robot chefs that are not only developing the algorithms using data to figure out the best possible recipes, but now they're cooking the food for us. And if that wasn't bad enough, it's not just humans who are concerned. Take a look at this. That's right, even cats. Even cats are worried about the monsters. So, let's unpack what's going on. Why are we all so anxious? Why are we all so afraid? Where is it that our fear comes from? Well, to help you understand that, I need to take you back, way back. Who's laughing? I was very cool, right? Obviously, I was not cool. That is sarcasm. This is me in 5th grade. I was a big science nerd, and this was my big science project. So obviously, I wasn't one of the cool kids. I was desperate to be one of the cool kids in my school, though. And all the cool kids in my school, I've lost some connectivity here. All of the cool kids in my school went to this haunted house that was up the street from where I lived. And I am not a person who likes to be scared. So that's not my thing. Haunted houses aren't my thing. But I begged my dad, and I said, please, all the cool kids are going to be there. I just want to be seen. So we waited in line for 4 hours. to get into this haunted house that I begged my dad to see. And we got as far as the lobby, and I lost my mind. I was so scared that I begged him to go home, and he said, "That's fine, but we will never speak of this again. And I am never bringing you back to something like this again." So the question is, why do we get scared? What's going on? And what's going on is we don't know what's going to happen next. And because we can't anticipate what's on the horizon, our brain goes into a direction that maybe is not the best for us, and certainly is not good for journalism. So the problem is that humans are limited biologically by the squishy computers in our heads. That's our brains. It's our limbic systems. And our limbic systems don't like new things. They like old, predictable things, and they certainly don't like new technology. New technology freaks us out. And that's something that we call the paradox of the present. It represents that moment when confronted with new technology or confronted with something that we don't know, our limbic systems kick in. And as a result of that, we can't see beyond what we currently know to be true. And so we reject or we fear new ideas. This is a constant problem for companies all over the place. This is what happened to BlackBerry, the paradox of the present. So BlackBerry at one point was doing so well that they had 98% of the global market share. We came up with a nickname for that phone. It was called the Crackberry, remember? So most of the Fortune 500 companies had contracts with BlackBerry. So they couldn't see, even though there were other things on the horizon, and even though out of Japan and Korea there were new types of phones, we knew that people were experimenting with phones that had no buttons. They couldn't see beyond what they knew to be true. And instead of seeing what was on the horizon and confronting it, instead they just iterated again and again and again. And of course, what happened? The iPhone came out. And everybody made fun of the iPhone initially, but within 2 years, it had swept, right? It had taken over. It was a phone with no buttons. So now I'm showing you a very cute picture of cats that I would like for you to focus on. They're very cute, because what I'm about to tell you next may not sit well with you, so enjoy the cats. So everybody in this room is suffering from a big old case of the paradox of the present. News organizations are suffering from this. We've worked with the Globe and Mail, which I think is one of the great news organizations around the world. And I'm using this because I think so highly of the Globe and Mail, and I think they've done really terrific work, but also because their story is your story. So this is what they looked like in the early 1940s. Okay, this was the newspaper, and this was a redesign in the 70s. And this was their first website, okay? And as mobile is starting to come onto the market, and as connectivity is changing, like most news organizations, like every news organization, the Globe and Mail continued to iterate. Just like BlackBerry, they kept building and tinkering with whatever worked, okay? And that's where we're at today, which I find so interesting because of everything that I'm seeing outside of journalism. News used to be a distribution model, which meant that you had near absolute control of the product that you were creating. People trusted the product because there wasn't anything beyond what you were creating for them. There was a high perceived value of the product. There was a high actual value of the product because there used to be coupons, right? And there was scarcity. And this is my scribbles, but this is what that looked like if I were to sort of draw it out. We had news organizations, which had editorial and advertising departments. They sent that to a printing press, and this is analogous to broadcast as well, but I'm just showing one example, which then sent to newsstands, or sent to people who delivered it, and eventually that product was received by consumers and by businesses. And that, as a result of this, it was linear, right? So there's quality control and trust and reliability throughout that entire chain. But that's not the way that things work in the year 2017, and it's not just because of the internet, it's because of all of the devices and the products and the tools, and all of the other things that you don't see behind the scenes. Because of all of this, we no longer have a distribution model. We have a discovery model, which means that you have near absolute control over your product, but only until the point of publication. This is partially what's led to an erosion of trust in the product. It's because there's stuff calling itself news all over the place, which none of you and your editorial teams worked on. As a result of that, there's a low perceived value of the product. So I'm going to show you a little bit later, and this is something you already know, but globally, there's an all-time low in terms of how people feel about media, about the work that you do. And there's a low actual value. So we're not, coupons aren't just in the newspaper anymore. You can get coupons through mobile apps and on the website and on websites. And we have an abundance of product. So this is what things look like now. So there are news organizations creating great editorial content, producing events as a way to make money. They've still got advertising. And then all of that goes into this mysterious fog, right? I like to call it the mysterious fog, because nobody knows what happens. So you may be partnering with Google, but Google isn't telling you exactly how things are moving around. They don't publish all of their algorithms so that we can see what they look like. You're sending your stuff to Facebook, some of you have chosen not to anymore. And Facebook isn't telling you how they're prioritizing the content and how it's being seen. So you're doing all of this work, and that work is going into a mysterious fog about which you know very little, and you're hoping and hoping that consumers and businesses will find you. I don't think that's good for the future of journalism. I don't think that's good for the valuable work that every one of you and all of your teams in this room are doing. So if you can overcome the paradox of the present, you can optimize for discovery. But you have to radically rethink the relationship between journalism, people, and technology. This is not about tinkering with the story model or tinkering with the website or even tinkering with data. This is something totally different. And so this is another ridiculous-looking sketch, but this is more along the lines of what I'm talking about. So instead of being a news distributor, I'm hoping that the future of journalism means that you are in charge of most of the information in my life, that, in fact, you are the arbiter. So news organizations are now creating stories, but you're also harnessing data and doing interesting things with it. You're building out browser extensions. The Washington Post, Philip Bump at the Washington Post, built an incredible tool. It's a Chrome extension that anytime Donald Trump says something, it will fact check and give you evidence for where that information came from, which is pretty cool. Anyhow, so that's a service, but it doesn't look like normal journalism. Developing your own algorithms to parse data in order to make the stories and the work that you're doing more relevant for your individual consumers. You're building out platforms of your own. You're doing all of this work. So this big thing here is your information stack, which goes into, instead of a mysterious fog, right, where you're just providing content, you become an invaluable partner with Google, an invaluable partner with Facebook, and all of these other services, and you have an equal seat and an equal say at the table. And then at that point, together you're reaching consumers and businesses, but it's a two-way flow. And in this way, I think there's an opportunity to do great journalism and also make it sustainable. So the thing to keep in mind here, we all know that monsters aren't real. They just seem real because we don't know or we can't understand what's coming next. So my question to you is, going back to that haunted house, what if we were all in the haunted house together and we flipped on the light switch? Well, if we flipped on the switch, then we can see what's there, right? It's a bunch of guys who like to play dress up on the weekends, which is scary in its own way, right? But at least we can see what's coming. We can see the people, we can see their costumes, we can see the trapdoors, right? We can see all the creepy crawlies, we can see the architecture, we can see the way that this haunted house was built, and we can see the monsters for what they are, right? It's just an old house, a bunch of people and data points for you to parse. You wouldn't know exactly what was coming next, However, you'd have a totally different viewpoint on what everything looks like. And you wouldn't be able to see exactly the exit, but now you would be able to make smarter decisions because you would know what's coming ahead. So that's what I do as a futurist. Futurists turn on the lights. And it's something that every single person in here should be doing too. I should note here, all of these slides are in a Dropbox folder for you, so you'll have all of this information along with a bunch of stuff later. But this is the methodology which we've made open for anybody to use and anybody to adapt. But this is how I do this. And for those of you who go to the Online News Association and see the big trends report that we produce every year, this is how we do it. And I am happy to keep doing it, and I will. But I also want you to participate in this process and to start investigating your own futures in a meaningful way. And the thing is, you already know how to do this because the first 3 steps have to do with reporting. So you're already poised to do a lot of this work. And it is looking out at the fringe, looking at things that haven't been reported yet, collecting data, and modeling using qualitative and quantitative data and assessments, and then mapping that out to understand what's coming next. So the first 3 steps of this are something that you can all already do. So the practical futures scenario here, you have to start identifying the monsters on your horizon, because they are coming, and I'm about to show you a bunch of them. So how do you and your organization transition away from just distributing content to a sustainable discovery model within the next 5 years? So the lesson from the monsters prey on your fears, and they only seem real when you can't see what's coming next. So the way to overcome journalism's monsters is to start planning and using the tools of futurists. So the second story I want to tell you is about red herrings. So Snapchat spectacles are on Jen's logo this year, which looks pretty cool, right? But the question is, what does this have to do with every single person sitting in this room? So just by show of hands, how many of you own a pair of Snapchat spectacles? We've got 2 people. Just because I'm curious, how many of you either owned or used a pair of Google Glass? Okay. So a lot of news organizations and a lot of people sort of don't get Snapchat. And they think that Snapchat, maybe even Snapchat spectacles, this whole notion of picture-based and short-form news, right, that it's a red herring, that this is something that's a temporary distraction, that it's not fundamentally altering the behavior of people, and like many other apps, at some point Snapchat will probably go away, and we'll all return to what we were doing before. What's interesting to me is that I've heard news organizations say the same thing about augmented reality. And I heard them say that about augmented reality about 10 years ago. Same thing. It's a distraction. It's going away. This isn't going to stick around. It's a red herring. Well, what if we zoomed out and took a broader view? So when I'm trying to figure out what's the future of news or what's a particular technology going to morph into, you can't just look at the technology itself. You have to look at all of the things that surround that technology, because technology doesn't evolve in its own silo, right? It's influenced by a lot of other things, by people, by demographics, by the economy, by lots of different facets of life. And once we take that broader view, we can connect the dots to see exactly how these ridiculous-looking sunglasses will have a pretty big impact on the future of news in a fairly short amount of time. So let me show you why and how. So at Facebook, at F8 a couple weeks ago, one of the biggest takeaways had to do with augmented reality. And so there were a couple of apps that were shown, a couple of instances of apps. So basically what's coming soon is you hold up your phone, and as you can see on the left-hand side, your phone will identify not just the cup of coffee, but if you're sitting at a coffee shop, it'll give you information about that coffee shop. It'll allow you to rate the coffee shop. You can share that information with your friends. And as you can see on the right-hand side, pretty soon we'll be able to leave digital notes and tags and things for people. Okay, so this was the thing that Facebook was showing. This may not seem like earth-shattering technology, but it was a big focal point during F8. And I know for some of you, this probably feels like Groundhog Day. Again, especially those of you who are early adopters in tech. And that's because we've seen a bunch of AR apps before that made big promises but didn't go anywhere. But the thing to bear in mind is that technology never develops along a linear track, right? So it'll get a little far, it'll get some investment, people will start adopting it, it may seem to go away, and then with some more time passing, we'll see the next iterations, and then the next iterations. So that's why it's important to keep paying attention, to stay focused. Technology always evolves as a series of seemingly unconnectable dots from the fringe. So in the 1990s, augmented reality was invented, and it was invented for industrial manufacturers. So people would put on these goggles, and instead of having to redraw their blueprints, they could make some changes in a computer system and see those blueprints overlaid on the projects that they were working on. So as a technology, this is actually now like almost 30 years old. In 2009, there was an incredibly amazing app that was launched in Paris called Retour. Did anybody use that? Any Parisians? Yeah, it was great. It was really great. You could hold your phone up, and it would tell you how to get around the city. And 2009 was a big year for augmented reality. It was also the year that Layer launched, and Layer promised the same thing. Hold up your phone, and you can get information, especially as you're traveling. And then nothing happened. Right? And AR seemed to go away. Then in 2012, Google Glass launched. And, all of a sudden people thought maybe this is it. And you can say what you want about the glasses. To me, the hardware wasn't what was impressive about Glass. It was the underlying infrastructure. And this was their first iteration. Last month, it was announced that Google Lens is launching, which is now a way to harness all of Google's information, which includes your personal information, into a system that, again, you sort of hold up your phone, and that phone is a screen or a periscope showing data for the real world. So what does all of this have to do with spectacles? So Snapchat has actually been working on augmented reality for a lot longer than most people realize. And while it is a social network, it's really an augmented reality platform. And people just aren't looking at it that way yet. So let me show you a patent, and this is in that folder that I created for you. This is a Snapchat patent that got filed now 2.5 years ago, which means that they were working on it even a year before that, which means they were researching even before that, right? So this has been long in the works. And what this patent does is it describes a method for recognizing objects in videos and in photos. And not just, people, so that you can put funny masks, right, on and filters when you take photos. Not just that. I'm talking about taking a photo of somebody and seeing that they've got a Starbucks cup, and not just recognizing that that's coffee, but recognizing that it's Starbucks coffee, okay? And they've described a methodology for taking the editorial content from a photo and then offering image overlays related to stuff from that product, okay? So in a sense, what this does is it describes an entirely new ecosystem for advertising that like all news organizations have overlooked. They're describing a new kind of Google ads, where you would bid on and place ads for objects within the view. And this would make us think about a future auction system, where companies would have the right to buy certain objects, for example, that coffee cup. Okay, so that's Snapchat. Apple's going all in on this too. So a couple weeks ago during an earnings call, Apple CEO Tim Cook talked about how the fact that they are high on AR, they are working on it intensively for the long term. There's a huge commercial opportunity. And then there's another patent that was filed by a company called Magic Leap, which a lot of people have sort of made fun of because they haven't really had a product yet, and their founders seem a little unhinged. But if you look through what's in that patent, they specifically address your future as news organizations, okay? They're talking about an augmented reality distribution system for news. and a discoverability system for news. They're talking about a real-time payment system just for news content and sharing consumption data across the platform. And to be fair, just because it's in a patent doesn't mean that it's going to launch. What I'm trying to show you here is that the future of news involves object recognition and augmented reality that has nothing to do specifically with storytelling. But there isn't a single news organization that I know of on the planet that's working on a visual object recognition strategy for revenue, advertising, or for content. So collectively, this is the red herring, you're following the wrong fish. So I've seen some really tremendous virtual reality projects, and I think that for some things, virtual reality is a great way to tell stories. But this is not what you should be following. This is good for you to invest a little bit of your time and energy into. Augmented reality is where we're headed. So what's really going on? Why, if all of the evidence shows us that that's the direction to go, are news organizations so consumed with virtual reality? The reason is this. This is what I like to call technology's red herring doom cycle. And what happens is, within newsrooms, when you see a new technology, editors will say, I don't know what this is. And then they may ask to investigate it, but more often than not, because again, this is our biological response. It's dangerous. It's frivolity. It's novelty. There's no point, right? With a little bit more time passing and some more access, okay, fine, I get what this is, but I don't understand how this helps journalism. And then all of a sudden, there's an adjacent technology that launches, right? Which in this case is virtual reality. And it's a red herring, and everybody sort of gets distracted. And then there's internal discussions, and then some investment, and adoption, within a community, and then you launch that product and the services using that adjacent technology, and then ultimately it doesn't perform the way that you want it to. And this happens over and over and over and over again. But I'm very optimistic about the future of news and about the future of journalism. And so the way it's just a matter of shifting your perspective a little bit. So the thing to do is to go from saying, I don't know what this is, to we're going to investigate this for as long as we think we need to. And knowing that technology doesn't develop in a straight line. So we're going to investigate it a little bit. If nothing happens, that's fine. We're going to keep it in our minds. Because at some point, it will develop further. And then it will develop further again. So you want to identify the new trends within that field, in this case AR, because it will keep evolving. And then make a decision at some point. We're going to wait or we're going to act. Right now, for news organizations, is the time to act. And the action should be, we're going to assign within our newsroom a few people just to be the key people to pay attention to augmented reality. That's all you need to do right now. Have a few people paying attention to what does the ecosystem look like, and maybe have every other week a short briefing about what's happening in AR, and how that might impact the work that you're doing. And then start experimenting, and then forge strategic alliances and equal being the operative term here, equal partnerships. So the Washington Post has started to experiment in this space. And to be fair, a bunch of news organizations experimented in 2009, and then nothing happened, and now everybody's using VR instead. They have a pretty interesting implementation. There's some architecture in Germany. If you're there and you have the app, you can hold up your phone and it will tell you, what you're looking at. But again, this still has to do with story. And what I'm hoping that you'll do is think about both stories and overall operations. So the practical future scenarios, can your news organizations use augmented reality to create an invisible information layer around your city sometime within the next 5 years? How can your organization start to prepare for visual object recognition and mobile advertising? Because pretty soon, that entire ecosystem is going to look nothing like it does right now, and that is going to really disrupt the business operations within your organizations. So the lesson from red herrings, from this story, with so much emerging technology, it's easy to misidentify trends. And again, this is not to say that the work that you're doing in virtual reality is not worthwhile. I'm just asking you to recognize that virtual reality has a limited use case right now, but augmented reality is a field that every technology company is pouring a ton of money into because they see the future implications and they're building them. So map scenarios for the implications of augmented reality before taking action, and that would be true of any technology. So the third and final story that I want to leave you with has to do with the future kings of the information landscape. And to do that, we got to talk about AI, the future of AI. Now, the year 2017 is remarkably similar to the year 1987. And that's because the year 1987 is when the internet went from being an academic hub of information sharing to a commercial outpost as we know it today. It started around the time of 1987, and the decisions that were made that year fundamentally altered humanity forever, because it changed how information was spread. It fundamentally changed newsrooms. It fundamentally changed what people think of as journalism, right? And that's just on the content side. The year 2017 is the year that AI leaps from academia and research labs to the mainstream. And it doesn't feel that way because for most of us, when we think about artificial intelligence, we think about anthropomorphized code and algorithms. We think about movies and science fiction novels. In actuality, we've already started to see some really big wins in artificial intelligence that don't match the stories that we've told ourselves. So Facebook has already built software and artificially intelligent systems capable of building their next iteration. So Facebook is teaching its AI systems how to propagate, literally how to have AI babies. And this story was a big hit in the tech community, but really didn't go noticed by everybody else. And that is, I could stand here and give you a 2-day talk on why AI is so important and where it came from, but let me summarize all of that by saying this. AI, the early visionaries who thought about artificially intelligent systems built them in order to play games to beat humans. So the whole premise of artificial intelligence isn't just to match wits with humans, it's to beat us, okay? And Google acquired a firm called DeepMind. They built a tool called AlphaGo, which for years has been trying to beat champion Go players around the world. And for reasons that I won't get into, beating a champion Go player has always been seen as one of the big tests for whether or not AI is achieving its potential. Their system got so good, it retired because they got bored beating world-class Go champions. In reality, AI is pervasive. It's not a cyborg that we talk to every day. It already surrounds us. Most people don't notice the impact because it's been incremental. But let me show you what I'm talking about. Over the next 5 years, 50% of our interactions with artificial intelligence is going to be using our voices. We're going to be talking to machines. So that fundamentally challenges our relationship to the computers in our lives. AI is going to start making decisions on our behalf. So let me show you one example of an incremental change that went unnoticed by everybody, but is actually a pretty big deal. So this is a side-by-side comparison. I searched for The Office on Google, and then Office, okay? And what you can see is The Office returned the American sitcom, because I was in the US. Maybe if I was in the UK, it would have returned the UK version. But it returned the sitcom, The Office. And when I just searched on Office, it returned Microsoft Office. This is an example of something called the Winograd schema, which again, in the AI community, that's a kind of big deal. Because what happened here, is a Boolean term that would, under normal circumstances, we would ignore that. But we've trained machines now to understand the context from our everyday lives. And so the computer understands the difference between the show The Office and just office. That doesn't happen when I type in the news versus news. I'm intentionally showing you a really boring example because I want to drive home the point of just how sophisticated these systems are becoming and how invisible they are to most of us. And this is important because you don't have a seat at the table. These are the big 7 companies who control the future of artificial intelligence, and as a result of that, the future of most of our everyday lives on planet Earth. IBM, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Baidu, which is in China, and Amazon. They each use proprietary data and algorithms, and they may say that they're open sourcing their tools, and they may give them away for free, but this is not the same thing as having complete access to the algorithm and to the code base and to the corpus, right? So it's proprietary, it's still proprietary, right? So IBM has Watson, Apple has its own systems, Google has something called TensorFlow, Facebook is building stuff out. So every company has its own proprietary stuff. And they're making decisions using this proprietary stuff about who you see, how you speak to machines, among other things, right? Everything from mining our public and private data to in order to make better decisions, to where your news shows up, if it does at all, to your search ranking, to the priority of your stories inside of social networks, to understanding human emotion and sentiment and attaching values to that, to making all of the voice interfaces that we will start to use in the next 5 years. And you're not there making the decisions with them. So you don't play a big enough role in this ecosystem. The future of AI really is about the future of decisions. Who gets to build decisions that make decisions on our behalf? These are decisions about humanity's shared values. They're decisions about how people get informed. They are decisions about what constitutes news itself. And again, I'm going to show you the kitties because everybody's talking about AI, and this is a really great report that Reuters produced, and there's another really great report that was produced by the AP, and I've read them both. But they don't address these bigger issues. Again, this goes back to that incremental change. They're definitions for understanding the ecosystem. They're how to use machine learning to help augment the processes within newsrooms. And that is important. The information in these reports is important, and there are learnings that can be applied to your newsrooms today, but you need to do more. News organizations are just refining processes and starting to incorporate some of these systems. And you're thinking about what to do with AI someday. But the day that you need to act is today. It's now. Because if you think you're in a partnership, if you think you're in an equal marriage with these companies, you're not. You're not, because you don't have equal say. So the question is, how could you become the future kings? How could you pull up a chair to the table and help decide our future? And this is where I'm going to end. So I'm going to set this up for you. This is a commercial that never aired in the United States from Burger King, and it took advantage of Google Home. So take a look at this.
You're watching a 15-second Burger King ad, which is unfortunately not enough time to explain all the fresh ingredients in the Whopper sandwich. But I got an idea. Okay, Google, what is the Whopper burger?
According to Wikipedia, the Whopper is a hamburger consisting of a flame-grilled quarter pounder.
Okay, so that never aired because Google found out about this and people got pretty upset. But it didn't need to air because it went viral, right? So Burger King's tagline is "Have it your way." And what they did with that ad was that they leveraged Google's artificially intelligent AI ecosystem, IoT devices, voice interfaces, and our human consumer desire to be dazzled. So my question that I'm going to end on is, in the future, what would it look like to engage AI so that I could have news my way, so I could have it my way? And the answer to that, I think, has something to do with this company. So this is China. This is a news aggregator that's been built with AI that does more than just curate content. It takes into consideration our interests, our sentiment, where we are, what we're doing. They get 78 million daily active users. As a result of that, Sequoia just invested $1 billion at a $12 billion valuation, which is probably insane. However, it tells us something about what's on the horizon. So there are a couple of good news aggregator apps out right now, but they're just looking at content. They don't take into consideration our behavior, our action, our plans, our worldviews. So the practical scenarios are here. In the future, what would it look like if you could curate my everyday life with information, and if you became a wire service, a responsive wire service, not just with content, but with infrastructure. Within the AI ecosystem, there are all these variables that are already being tracked: where I am, what's on my schedule, if I'm walking, if I'm running, if I'm standing online for a few minutes. So you could start to use that information too, and use machine learning algorithms to surface and deliver information that's relevant to what I'm doing in a format that makes the most sense for me, is empathetic to my background and to my worldviews, and offers radical transparency, because trust is a perennial trend and is the reason that ad got shut down. And in the middle of all of this, people were updating Wikipedia to say that the ingredients in the Whopper burger include cyanide and toenail clippings and just rat. So we know that public trust is at an all-time low, right? We have a model for how to tell people what's in our products. And so maybe it's time for a nutritional label for news, where you would explain the sources of personal information that's being included, public data, every single person who worked on the story or on the project, the context that you need to explain, and how the data was used. And no, not everybody's going to pay attention to this, but this helps solve some of the other problems we have, and it makes your information more useful. And I think this is how you get a seat at the table, that you become part of this ecosystem. So the lesson here: don't be a bystander to AI. It's fine to keep learning, but we have to start doing. So don't wait. You need to start now to develop a strategic plan and to find industry collaborators, true partners, not people who are just using your content so that they can advance what they're doing. So those are the end of my stories. Can I show everybody the tools and products real quick? So 3 simple requests, and these are fast. The first one is, you have to start thinking like a futurist and continually listen for signals and look for patterns. Don't do this. Don't wait until the next time you hear somebody talk about trends in news. I want you to start doing this as well, which means I would like for you to spend 10 minutes a day reading about new technologies and real trends from sources that you wouldn't normally look at, places like the MIT Technology Review, and there's lots of other places. But you, as editors, I want you to start doing this work. And I want you to get to action. I want you to start working incrementally every day, and I'm hoping that you will collaborate. Gen is a perfect organization to facilitate that collaboration between your organizations. So here are 3 tools that you can use. First, I've made a giant folder, which is about a month's worth of reading, to help you in this quest. This is the link. I'm sure somebody will tweet it out for us. So it's bit.ly, it's case sensitive, capital GEN 17. The presentation is in there, a lot of research, stuff that you can repurpose and use for your newsrooms in whatever way you want. We've put a bunch of open source tools in it, so if you're somebody who teaches, feel free to take that and use it for your classes. Whatever it takes to get everybody more involved. The key slides are there. There's a decision matrix, is the second tool. This is also in that folder. The instructions are here. It will help you figure out when to make a decision about technology so that you don't get distracted by the red herrings. And finally, there's a list of all the trends you should be tracking until you're here again next year. These are those trends. There's a lot of them. But that's in the folder, and they all come from our annual report, which is also in the folder. Please do not download it here because it's 50 megs. It's big, so don't download it here. You'll crash the network, but download it when you get back. I will be here all day and happy to chat and discuss and debate. Thank you so much.
Amy, thank you very much. I alone could ask you questions for several hours, and I'm sure